Hello, this is Executive Director, Reverend Angelia Coleman. We did a training a little while ago from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network on using the secondary traumatic stress core competencies in trauma-informed supervision. And this is part 2 of that. So last time we left off on educating your supervisees. Now we're starting on assess your supervisees. Evaluate the immediate current well-being of the supervisee. Identify negative self-appraisals, cognitive distortions, and ineffective coping behaviors that the supervisee may be demonstrating. Observe, continuously and over time, the emotional response of the supervisee over time to assess recovery and the potential need for added supports or referrals. Coach and support supervisees. Assist with self-regulation, including cognitive skills, such as thinking about a situation differently, and behavioral recovery, such as distraction, self-soothing, and physical relaxation and redirection of energy. Communicate concern and support. Support the supervisee toward the development of skills for managing intense affect. And to prompt supervisees to utilize these strategies when needed. Provide concrete suggestions regarding emotional regulation strategies, and emphasizes their importance by allowing supervisees the time needed to implement their chosen strategies. Competency. Knowledge of basic psychological first aid, PFA, or other supportive approaches to assist staff after an emergency or crisis event. Operational definition. The supervisor is able to do the following: assure the psychological, physical, and emotional safety of staff following an emergency or crisis event incident, including a discussion of physical and psychological and emotional safety. Know the 8 core actions of PFA approach. Recognize the different ways staff may respond to an emergency or crisis event. Invite questions from staff in a manner that supports individuals' need for emotional safety and by respecting individuals' choice to share or not share as they see fit. Because sometimes we want to tell, we want to know everything, but sometimes people don't want to tell you everything. And, that's their prerogative. Provide accurate information regarding secondary traumatic stress, signs to self-monitor the signs and symptoms, and strategies to enhance coping. Meaning keep an eye on your staff, make sure they're not, experiencing trauma and stress from hearing about other people's trauma and stress all day. Inquire about the immediate needs of staff following an event. Assist supervisees in the development of an action plan to address identified needs. Facilitate access to up-to-date information regarding resources available to staff who have experienced direct or indirect trauma exposure, including EAP information, insurance and paneled providers, and specific recommendations related to referral sources familiar with secondary traumatic stress. Competency, ability to both model and coach supervisees in using a trauma lens to guide case conceptualization and service delivery. Operational definition. The supervisor is able to do the following: educate supervisees regarding how trauma may alter functioning of a trauma-exposed client. Assure that the supervisee has formulated the role of trauma in the clinicianal clinical, I can't talk today, presentation. Redirect the supervisee from focusing on what is wrong with a trauma-exposed client, such as diagnosis and symptoms, to what happened in the client's life. Consideration of how behaviors or symptoms may make sense when the client's trauma is assessed, because all too often, I've seen this in a lot of mental health professionals, your client just becomes that, your client, this client, that client. You forget that they're a person, and that this has impacted their life. So when you're working with people who've been abused, you need to have some compassion. You need to realize this is a person and this has affected their life, and you need to have compassion, not just talk about them like they're some mentally ill client. That's, not cool. Guide supervisees to a recognition of a client's trauma history and symptoms in a way that explains what the client may be experiencing and serves to guide service delivery. Redirect supervisees when they drift into attitudes or beliefs about clients that are inconsistent with the trauma-focused lens. And sometimes that can happen. We are persons with personalities, and sometimes your personality is not going to click with this person. Like I said, sometimes, you can't help a person, and you just be honest with them and say, you know what? We're not getting along. It's not going to work out. I recommend somebody else. It's good to have referral sources, in case this happens. But, all of your people who are dealing with clients, they really need to be able to step back and be compassionate people. Educate supervisees about key trauma concepts. Support them in incorporating these concepts into a trauma-informed case formulation, and in guiding the supervisee when they drift into an approach inconsistent with the trauma lens. Again, letting their personal stuff creep in the way of what they're supposed to be doing. Promote fidelity to trauma-responsive and evidence-supported or based models in daily practice. Encourage supervisee to bring forth multiple perspectives of the presenting problems, priorities, focus, and goals of treatment by encouraging supervisee's active engagement of the client's significant others or family, and extended supports in the assessment, intervention planning, and ongoing service delivery process. Competency, knowledge of resiliency factors and ability to structure resilience building into individual and group supervisory activities. Operational definition. The supervisor is able to do the following. Facilitate the supervisee's experience of a developing sense of mastery of the management of trauma-related issues with clients. Identify and develop supervisee's strengths and help supervisee him or her apply those strengths to job-related activities. Because, some people write for a certain job and other people write for another job. And, be kind of looking for the strengths of someone. And then kind of suggest that, hey, maybe you would do really well here. And then you can move them to there if they were in something else that they're not so good at. Connect the individual to his or her team to guard against isolation and to develop a sense of shared ownership of difficult circumstances. Because not everything is going to come up roses and stuff happens. Support the development of compassion, satisfaction in the supervisee via the following. See, they're bringing that up too. Assisting with the analysis of supervisee perceptions regarding complex case situations, and a supporting acceptance of situations that cannot be changed. Because everybody wants to put things in neat little boxes or folders. And if this person acted this way, this person should act this way. Or, you read the textbooks. These are the signs of, but that's not it. We're not cookie cutter people. We're people. Assisting the supervisee to reframe situations to allow for the recognition of partial successes. Assisting the supervisee to adopt a positive view of him or herself and their skill level. You should never tell anyone that's you're supervising that they suck and they're doing a terrible job or they're out the door, because then they will be out the door, unless that's what you want. Sometimes you want to make the suggestion to them that they leave. You're trying to be nice. You don't want to throw them out the door because what they're doing is just not right or good. So you just kind of let them come to that themselves, you know. Encouraging the supervisee to notice, acknowledge, and savor positive moments with clients. Because I've had clients who've become good friends, you know. And I've had some that I've tried that with and it didn't work out so well, and that's sad. But you have to expect that when you're working with people with mental problems, that's going to spill over into any type of, you know, relationship that you might have. Reinforcing the benefits of engaging in pleasurable activities at work and off hours. Because I have seen provider burnout, and you need to have a life outside of working with clients that have been exposed to trauma, because that is stressful in their life and it's going to be stressful in your life. You have to be able to unplug and unwind and have a life of your own, because if you make your job your life, you're going to become a workhorse and you're going to drive yourself crazy. Competency, ability to distinguish between expected changes in supervisee perspectives and cognitive distortions related to indirect trauma exposure. Operational definition. The supervisor is able to do the following. Recognize when changes in a supervisee's perspectives occur. Like, so John's been a happy-go-lucky guy, and now suddenly John is in a bad mood and griping at people all the time. You know, why? We need to ask John, what is that about? Successfully engage supervisee in discussion of observed changes and obtain supervisee's his or her perspectives, thoughts regarding these changed views. I would have worded that differently, but that's how they worded it. Anyway, basically meaning, you know, say, hey, I noticed this change going on. Why do you think that is? Normalize that changes in worldview, such as bad things do happen to innocent children, that will naturally occur during trauma work. Assist supervisee by challenging unhelpful cognitive distortions about their self, work, or the world, such as thinking this is useless, or the world is unsafe, or I'm the only one. And a lot of survivors of abuse think that. No one will understand this. This is horrible and no one's going to understand this. I mean, I felt that way. Or displaying hypervigilance. And I'm not so bad about that now, but I used to be in my, 20s, 30s, used to be pretty bad about that. Provide support towards replacing cognitive distortions with more accurate assessments. Competency, ability to use appropriate self-disclosure in supervisory sessions to enhance the supervisee's ability to recognize, acknowledge, and respond to the impact of indirect trauma. The supervisor is able to do the following. Normalize STS responses through timely use of self-disclosure related to theirs or, they've written theirs, his, or hers. Okay. Own experiences dealing with trauma work. Employ self-disclosure as a tool to help supervisees recognize, acknowledge, and respond to the impact of indirect trauma. Willingly disclose when asked directly by a supervisee, thereby avoiding a posture of withholding, and facilitating emotional relatedness and equality in the relationship. Monitor that his or her own motivation and intentions as a critical factor in weighing the ethical force of self-disclosure particularly with the goal of such disclosure is primarily for the supervisee's benefit. And I think the last statistics I heard was 52% of people get into trauma work because they've had their own trauma. So chances are anybody who's going to work with you has probably already had their own trauma too. So keep that in mind. Okay, and I'm going to give you some references here. The Resilience Alliance, promoting resilience and reducing secondary trauma among child welfare staff. And again, you can go to the NCTSN.org site to find that. Secondary traumatic stress, a fact sheet for child-serving professionals. You can also go to the NCTSN.org site to find that. Secondary trauma and child welfare staff, guidance for supervisors and administrators. You can also go to the NCTSN.org site to find that. Secondary traumatic stress informed organizational assessment. And you can go to www.uky.edu/CTAC to find that. Secondary traumatic stress, a fact sheet for organizations employing community violence workers. And you can go to NCTSN.org and find that. Secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout among professionals who work with maltreated children. Professional bibliography, you can go to www.nationalcac.org to find that. Stress and burnout, you can go to www.Headington Institute, that's Headington-Institute.org to find that. Impact of secondary traumatic stress on professional functioning. You can go to books.google.com to find that. And books, Van Dermoot Lipsky, L. and Burke C. 2009, Trauma Stewardship, an Everyday Guide to Caring for Self While Caring for Others, from Barrett Kohler Publishers. Matthew F. 2012, The Compassion Fatigue Workbook. Creative Tools for Transforming Compassion Fatigue and Vicarious Traumatization by Routledge. Fisher P. 2015, Building Resilient Teams. Facilitating Workplace Wellness and Organizational Health in Trauma-Exposed Environments. Rothschild B. 2006, Help for the Helper. The Psychophysiology of Compassion Fatigue and Vicarious Trauma, from W.W. Norton and Company. And then there's more. Matthew Francois, 2012, The Compassion Fatigue Workbook, Creative Tools for Transforming Compassion Fatigue and Vicarious Traumatization, New York, Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group. Scott Heller, S., and Gilkerson, L., A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision, Washington, D.C., 0-3. Shamoon Shannock, R., 2009, What is Reflective Supervision? And S. Scott Heller and L. Gilkerson, A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision, Washington, D.C., 0-3. Secondary Trauma and Child Welfare Staff, Guidance for Supervisors and Administrators. You can find that on nctsn.org. Caring by J.C. Lawson, H.L. and Devlin M., 2012. Planning for Emotional Labor and Secondary Traumatic Stress in Child Welfare Organizations. Journal of Family Strengths, Volume 12, Issue 1. Self-assess for signs and symptoms of secondary traumatic stress affecting their own functioning. Best Practices, Standards in Social Work Supervision, page 15. And you can find that at www.socialworkers.org. STAM BH 2005, the Pro QOL Manual, the Professional Quality of Life Scale, Compassion Satisfaction, Burnout, and Compassion Fatigue, Secondary Trauma Scales, Lutherville, Maryland, Sidron Press. Secondary Trauma and Child Welfare Staff, Guidance for Supervisors and Administrators. And you can find that on NCTSN.org. Define a plan for regular reflection to identify and self-assess secondary traumatic stress. Green Cross Academy of Traumatology Standards of Self-Care Guidelines. And you can find that on selfcarespecialists.com. Address secondary traumatic stress signs and symptoms when they arise in their own lives. Matthew Francois, 2012. The Compassion Fatigue Workbook. Creative Tools for Transforming Compassion Fatigue and Vicarious Traumatization. New York, from Rutledge, Taylor, and Francis Group. Osofsky, Joy D., 2011. Vicarious Traumatization and the Need for Self-Care in Working with Traumatized Young Children. In Joy D. Osofsky, Clinical Work with Traumatized Young Children, New York, the Guilford Press. Willingly seek support from peers or own supervisor. Best Practice Standards in Social Work Supervision, page 15, at www.socialworkers.org. And some others are Friedman R., 2002, The Importance of Helping the Helper. Best Practice, Next Practice, a publication of the National Child Welfare Resource Center for Family-Centered Practice. And you can find that on www.hunter.cuny.edu. Figley, Charles, editor, Compassion Fatigue, Coping with Secondary Traumatic Stress Disorder in Those Who Treat the Traumatized. New York, Brunner and Maisel, 1995. STAM, BH, editor, Secondary Traumatic Stress, Self-Care Issues for Clinicians, Researchers, and Educators. Lutherville, Maryland, Sidron Press, 1995. Bernstein v. 2002 to 2003. Standing Firm Against the Forces of Risk. Supporting Home Visiting and Early Intervention Workers through Reflective Supervision. Newsletter of the Infant Mental Health Promotion Project, IMP, Volume 35, Winter 2002 and 3. Foulds, B., and Curtis K., 2002, No Longer Risking Myself. Assisting the supervisor through supportive consultation. In Shrilla J. and Weatherston D., Case Studies in Infant Mental Health, Risk, Resiliency, and Relationships. Washington, D.C., 0-3, pages 177 through 186. Secondary Trauma and Child Welfare Staff. Guidance for Supervisors and Administrators. And you can find that on NCTSN.org. Parlakian R., 2002. Look, Listen, and Learn. Reflective Supervision and Relationship-Based Work. Washington, D.C., 0-3. Scott Heiler S. and Gilkerson L., 2009. A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision. Washington, D.C., 0-3. Shamoon Shanok R., Gilkerson L., Egbeer L., and Finichel E., 1995. Reflective Supervision, A Relationship for Learning. Washington, D.C., 0-3, pages 37 through 41. Reflective supervision. Supporting reflections as a cornerstone for competency. And you can find that on www.helpmegrow.ohio.gov. Heller, S&L, Gilkerson, 2009. A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision. Washington, D.C., 0 to 3. Reflective Supervision Guidelines. You can find that at www.macmh.org. Emotion Regulation. You can find that at www.getselfhelp.co.uk. Traumatic Stress. The Effects of Overwhelming Experience on Mind, Body, and Society. Edited by Bessel A. Vanderkolk, Alexander C. McFarlane, and Lars Waysafe. The Guilford Press, New York, 2007. Assess Effectiveness. Pro QOL, Stam, Beth. Psychological First Aid Manual. NCTSN.org. Psychological First Aid, Johns Hopkins University. www.coursera.org. The Effectiveness of Psychological First Aid as a Disaster Intervention Tool. You can find that at www.evidenceaid.org. YouTube video, What is Meant by Psychological First Aid? That is on YouTube. You can search that. YouTube video, Psychological First Aid, the Core Actions. You can search that. NCTSN Secondary Traumatic Stress web pages. You can find those on nctsn.org. What is compassion fatigue? You can find that on www.tendacademy.ca. Low impact debriefing. You can find that on www.tendacademy.ca. Patricia Fisher, PhD, Building Resilient Teams, Facilitating Workplace Wellness and Organizational Health in Trauma-Exposed Environments. Fisher & Associates Solutions, Incorporated. The Missouri Model. You can find that on https, of course, sim//dmh.mo.gov. SAMHSA, Trauma-Informed Care in Behavioral Health Services, Tip 57. You can find that at www.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. Practice Guidelines for Treatment to Complex Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care and Service Delivery, Blue Knot Foundation. You can find that at www.blueknot.org. NCTSN Think Trauma Toolkit, 12 Core Concepts Guide, and supplemental handouts in the NCTSN Child Welfare Trauma Toolkit. Refer to case examples and supplemental handouts, and you can find those on nctsn.org. San Diego School of Social Work PowerPoint. You can find that, on socialwork.sdsu.edu. Supervision for Trauma-Informed Practice. Berger, Roney, Quiros, Laura, Traumatology, Volume 204, December 2014, 296 through 301. Sansbury, Brittany S., Kelly Graves, and Wendy Scott, 2014, Managing Traumatic Stress Responses Among Clinicians, Individual and Organizational Tools for Self-Care. Wagman M. Alex, 2015, The Role of Empathy is Burnout, Compassion Satisfaction, and Secondary Traumatic Stress Among Social Workers. Guide to Developing Emotional Resilience. You can find that on www.communitycare.co.uk. Transforming compassion fatigue into compassion satisfaction. Top 12 self-care tips for helpers. You can find that on www.compassionfatigue.org. Self-identity, embodiment, and the development of emotional resilience. You can find that at http://bjsw.oxfordjournals.org. Resilience Alliance promoting resilience and reducing secondary traumatic stress among child welfare staff. A participant manual. You can find that at www.nrcpfc.org. What about you? A workbook for those who work with others. You can find that at www.ncswtraumaed.org. Excuse me. 50 common cognitive disorders. You can find that at https://www.psychologytoday.com. Resilience Alliance promoting resilience and reducing secondary traumatic stress among child welfare staff. You can find that at www.nrcpfc.org. Kinsvatter A, Granello DH, and Duba J, 2008. Cognitive techniques as a means for facilitating supervisory development, counselor education, and supervision. And that is all that we have time for today. So I hope you found this educational or inspirational. And that's it for now. Until next time.